She wasn't on the schedule. She wasn't even supposed to pause. But as Leona Grant walked past the open doorway of the 32nd floor boardroom tray of espresso, balanced in both hands, she caught a glimpse of the projection on the screen. And she stopped. "The forecast curve is overstated," she said quietly, not stepping in. "Your baseline's reversed. If that goes live, someone will flag it as inflated in less than 3 minutes." It wasn't a shout. It wasn't even loud. But the effect was immediate. One consultant frowned. A VP chuckled. And at the center of the room, CEO Victor Huxley turned his head slowly toward the door. "I'm sorry," what he asked, voice clipped. Leona stood still. Crisp black shirt, slate apron, shoes flat and silent on the tile. She kept her tone calm. "You're using a retention factor that doesn't reflect post-pandemic volatility. It's giving you artificial lift." Someone in the back raised an eyebrow. "Wait, who is she?" Another voice, half laughing. "She's on the event staff." Victor stepped forward. "Are you suggesting our analytics team can't do their job?" "I'm saying the model's broken," Leona said. "Whether anyone's willing to admit it or not." Victor pointed at the tray. "This isn't your place." "Isomo one." Leona nodded. "You're right." It paused. "But that number still doesn't exist." She turned and walked away, leaving behind a room where no one was smiling anymore. Some people raise their voices to be heard. Others speak once and shake the room. If you've ever been dismissed before anyone heard your full sentence, tell us where you're watching from. We read every comment, every name, every moment someone like Leona finally got seen. Back at the far end of the table, Nina Tran, the youngest analyst in the room, wasn't laughing. She stared at her tablet, then quietly typed, "Reopen data logic, verify input layer silently." 12 years earlier, no one looked away when Leona Grant walked into the room. She was 20, dressed in jeans and a blazer 2 sizes too big, standing in front of a whiteboard at the regional finals of the National Forecasting Challenge. Her hands moved fast. Her voice didn't shake. The room was filled with postgrads, professors, and hedge fund recruiters. She didn't blink. Her model was simple, elegant, terrifyingly accurate. It predicted behavioral shifts in unstable markets using just 5 variables so clear, so sharp, a Columbia advisor called it 3 years ahead of where most of us are looking. When she finished, no one clapped right away. They were too busy trying to catch up. The award came that night. First place, a certificate, a plaque, and a full scholarship offer from Westbridge Tech, one of the top behavioral data programs in the country. She took the envelope home to her mom. The apartment was small, but that night it felt like a cathedral. Her mother danced in the kitchen with a dish towel over her shoulder. Her little brother, Darnell, begged to read her acceptance letter out loud. For the first time in years, Leona allowed herself to believe the door had finally opened. It didn't stay open long. 3 weeks later, her mother collapsed while cleaning an office building overnight. No insurance. A stroke. 2 surgeries. Rent overdue. Darnell was 11 and scared. Leona sat in the ER hallway with a tuition packet in one hand and a hospital bill in the other. She made the only choice she could. She didn't defer. She disappeared. No calls. No complaints. Just faded. The judges assumed she took another offer. The program director at Westbridge emailed twice, then stopped. Leona took the first job she could get, night shift at a delivery hub. Then retail. Then logistics. Years passed. The only time she touched a whiteboard was when she helped Darnell with his algebra homework after school. Now, back on the 32nd floor, the scent of espresso still fresh on her sleeves, she stood just outside the boardroom and reminded herself that moment had passed. She wasn't a data prodigy anymore. She was part of the background. But for the first time in a decade, someone in that room had typed the word verify because of her. And maybe that meant the door hadn't closed all the way. And maybe that meant the door hadn't closed all the way. A soft chime echoed inside the boardroom. Nina Tran blinked. Her tablet screen had just refreshed. A warning banner pulsed in orange. Baseline multiplier out of sync source detected. She tapped it. The forecast graph stuttered for half a second, then corrected itself downward. The exact drop Leona had warned about. Nina's fingers hovered above the keyboard, but her mind was no longer on the numbers. She glanced toward the hallway where Leona had stood just minutes ago. No lab coat, no title, no credential, just a woman who saw what everyone else missed. Nina had been in dozens of pitch rehearsals since she started her internship at Tower West, but none of them made her stomach drop like this one. She tapped the orange warning again. The error message was vague, out of sync input layer. It didn't say what exactly was wrong, but the section was clear. It was the same metric the woman in the hallway had mentioned: loyalty retention. Nina narrowed her eyes and pulled up the previous version of the forecast model from the company archive. It had been updated 2 nights ago, marked final, approved. The numbers looked right on the surface, but the formula in the background, something was off. She highlighted the key cell and dug into the logic. Her fingers slowed as she traced the formula. The multiplier wasn't just misaligned. It was referencing a static customer set pre-2020 behavior, which meant whoever last edited this ignored the volatility shift entirely. Nina's heart beat a little faster. She checked the version log. The last editor was a junior analyst, probably rushing. It wasn't malicious, just lazy, but the result: an overstatement of customer retention by nearly 11% in year 3. She sat back in her chair, exhaled quietly, then looked around the room. Everyone was still focused on slide transitions, lighting, mic checks. Victor was reviewing the welcome script. No one else had noticed. No one had even bothered to double-check the final math, except her and the woman they had dismissed without a second thought. Nina reached for her tablet again and quietly duplicated the spreadsheet. She didn't want to cause a scene. Not yet. She just wanted to understand how deep the error went. As she adjusted the projection using updated behavior models, the forecast curve dipped slightly but smoothed out more realistically. It looked honest. She stared at the screen for a moment, then whispered to herself, she was right. For the first time that morning, Nina wasn't just following instructions. She was listening. Nina took a breath and stood up, holding her tablet close to her chest. She didn't have a title. She didn't even have a desk yet. But if this file went live as is, they weren't just risking investor backlash, they were misleading the market. And someone needed to say it. She walked over to where Russell, the team's senior data advisor, was checking the final deck transitions. He was in his 50s, methodical, respected. If anyone would take her seriously, it was him. Russell, she said quietly, I was running the forecast back up, and I think there's a logic error in the loyalty projection. He looked up, distracted. You mean a formatting issue? Naudi. It's the underlying multiplier. The curve's based on a static loyalty behavior, not dynamic churn. I double-checked the version log and before she could finish, Russell held up a hand. Nina, this model was vetted by 3 departments and signed off by legal. You're looking at a sandbox copy. We don't have time to rerun numbers an hour before we go live. Nina didn't step back, but the output is overprojecting by 11% in year 3. I ran it using the actual customer volatility index from Q4. It flattens the curve, but it's more accurate. If someone, he cut her off, firmer now. If someone catches it live, we have language to frame it as an aggressive growth estimate. This is a pitch, not a tax audit. Her stomach turned. That's exactly what she said. Russell frowned. Nina hesitated, realizing how that sounded. The woman from the hallway. She spotted the error just from looking at the screen. He stared at her for a long second, then exhaled. Nina, you're new here, and I get that you want to help. But don't bring catering comments into the analytics room. He turned back to his laptop. Conversation over. Nina didn't argue. She just stepped back, heart pounding. In her hands was a version of the model that worked. Quietly, honestly, without inflated promises. She looked toward the hallway again. Leona was gone. But the number was still wrong. And now Nina was the only person in that room who couldn't pretend she hadn't seen it. Nina returned to her seat, heart still thudding. Russell hadn't listened. No one had to take, but the data in her hands didn't lie. And now, every glance toward the screen felt heavier, like the numbers themselves were holding their breath. Victor was adjusting his lapel mic. Across the table, The CFO was reviewing legal phrasing for Q&A. The clock on the wall blinked 10:58. Nina looked at the slide deck one more time. It was perfect. Too perfect. And then without warning, the side door clicked open again. Leona stepped back in. She wasn't carrying coffee. No tray. No apron. Just her company arm, focused. Eyes steady. The room turned slowly. Someone near the front shifted in their chair. Victor looked up, surprised at first, then visibly irritated. You again? Leona didn't apologize. She took a slow step forward, stopping just outside the circle of executives. I know I wasn't asked back in, she said quietly, but that projection is still wrong, and you're about to pitch it live. Victor's jaw tightened. I think we've already addressed that. She nodded. You dismissed it. That's not the same. In Mary or what? He stood straighter. Are you seriously trying to insert yourself into a boardroom pitch? Leona didn't flinch. No. I'm trying to prevent a public correction 3 minutes into your stream. One of the junior analysts looked at Victor, then back at Leona. What's the actual error, he asked, voice cautious. She pointed to the screen. The base retention model assumes fixed customer behavior. It doesn't account for churn volatility post-2021. The error margin grows over time. By year 3, it breaks. The CFO muttered under his breath. Another executive opened the data sheet again. Victor stepped forward. And how would you even know that? Leona looked him in the eye. Because I've seen this model before. I've built versions of it. Yours is clean, but it's wrong. Silence. A few people looked down, unsure what to say. And then Nina, still holding her tablet, stood up slowly. She's right. Everyone turned. Nina tapped her screen. I ran the same revision. Her numbers hold. Victor stared at both of them. The clock clicked to 10:59. The room didn't explode. It froze. Because for the first time this morning, someone not on the schedule had just taken control of the room. And in that exact moment, just for a second, Leona didn't see spreadsheets or suits or camera lights. She saw a white envelope, creased at the edges, with her name written in perfect, looping ink. The scholarship offer on Inmanorenon, the one she never replied to. The memory hit like a whisper, louder than applause. The envelope had her name on it, printed in a serif font that felt heavier than paper. She'd held it for days, rereading the offer, full tuition, housing, and a guaranteed research assistantship at Westbridge's Behavioral Analytics Lab. No catch, no fine print, just recognition finally. She almost said yes, but that memory faded the moment she heard the laughter. Back in the boardroom, she was no longer 22 with a future. She was a woman standing in a place she wasn't meant to speak, and now they were laughing. A senior analyst, Dev Patel, tilted back in his chair, half grinning, as he muttered, "We've got a barista who does derivatives now." A few heads turned toward him. No one stopped him. One consultant even chuckled under his breath. Leona said nothing. She didn't glare, didn't flinch. Instead, she stepped closer to the edge of the table and spoke in the same calm voice she'd used before. Your year 3 loyalty projection assumes linear decay, but churn behavior since mid-2021 follows a compound volatility curve. You're modeling based on a static segment, which skews retention by nearly 11%. Someone blinked. Another looked at his laptop, unsure. Victor didn't let the silence stretch. Leave the numbers to people who are paid to defend them, he said sharply. She paused, then gave a single nod. Of course. Jim. No sarcasm, no challenge, just grace under fire. She turned away, began to walk slow, controlled. But behind her, Nina didn't laugh. She didn't look away. She looked at the screen again. At the formula. At the cell reference Leona had pointed to, and her throat tightened. She leaned forward just a little, whispering to no one in particular. Wait. She's right. Nina didn't say anything out loud. She just leaned back slightly, eyes fixed on the model. The same slide everyone else was ignoring. She opened her tablet again and pulled up the archived version of the forecast deck, the one stored before legal finalized the numbers. It only took a few seconds to find the cell Leona had referenced. At first glance, it looked fine. The curve rose cleanly. But when Nina clicked into the formula, her stomach dropped. The base logic was referencing a static cohort unchanged since Q1 of last year. No churn adjustment. No behavioral volatility layer. Just a flat loyalty score stretched over 3 years. Exactly what Leona had described. Nina double-checked the calculation by running a copy through her own backup model. She switched the retention variable to match current volatility assumptions from post-pandemic consumer data. The line dropped. Not drastically, not alarmingly, but just enough to make the original look artificial. Inflated overhears. She sat still for a moment, screen glowing in her lap, while voices continued around her. Someone was asking about the lighting. Victor was testing mic volume. But in Nina's mind, the noise faded. All she could hear was that sentence again. You're using a retention factor that doesn't reflect post-pandemic volatility. And it was right there in front of her. Undeniable. She looked toward the door Leona had walked out of. No one else had followed up. No one had cared. But now Nina knew. And the knowledge wasn't quiet anymore. It pressed at her chest, made her fingers twitch. She could keep it to herself. Let it slide. Pretend she hadn't double-checked anything. But the slide was about to go live. And if no one stopped it, they were all complicit. And if no one stopped it, they were all complicit. A soft tone echoed from the wall screen. 10:59. 1 minute to broadcast. Nina looked around the room again. Everyone was in position. Everyone was pretending. Her thumb hovered over the share button on her tablet. One tap, and someone else would have to see what she saw. But once she sent it, there was no going back. Nina tapped the share button. The updated file blinked across the room, landing in the shared drive labeled Final Client V3. She didn't add a note. She didn't need to. Anyone who opened it would see the same thing she saw. The base loyalty model had been patched over with an outdated assumption, and the resulting projection was exaggerated by millions. A few seconds later, one of the senior analysts near the head of the table frowned. Who just uploaded a new deck? The room stirred. Victor looked up from his notes. What deck? Same philonemy. But the numbers on slide 14 don't match. Nina's heart pounded. She didn't speak. The analyst opened the file, enlarged the forecast, then froze. His brows furrowed. Victor walked over to the screen and leaned in. What are we looking at? The analyst hesitated. It's a loyalty model correction. The third-year forecast drops by 11%. Victor turned to face the room, his voice sharper now. Who edited this? Silence. Nina stood up slowly. It was me. I copied the original logic, then reran it using updated churn behavior. One of the junior VPs blinked. And that's what she said earlier, isn't it? No one answered. Victor's jaw tightened. How long have we had the wrong version in circulation? Since Monday, someone muttered. Maybe longer. The analyst checked the log. Last overwrite was late Tuesday night. Someone must have patched the deck manually before legal reviewed it. Nina spoke again, calmer this time. It wasn't intentional. But if we go live with it, and someone checks the projection line, Victor cut her off. Then we'll frame it as aggressive optimism. Someone near the back looked up. Unless they call it manipulation. The air grew heavy. No one in that room had ever launched a deck this big with a known data flaw sitting in the core. And now they had 1 minute to decide whether to fix it or bluff through it. Howard Denton, the CFO, stood up fast, faster than anyone expected from a man his age. His chair scraped hard against the floor as he walked straight toward the shared screen. Who touched the baseline file, he asked, voice sharp. That model was signed off Tuesday afternoon. The legal team had the numbers by Wednesday. He tapped the screen. This wasn't in the approved version. The analyst from earlier cleared his throat. Last overwrite was at 9:42 p. Mr. Mountain. Tuesday night. The editor ID says A. Michaels. That's not from this team. Victor narrowed his eyes. Marketing. Swanity de Serbi Familias. No? Finance. Junior associate, probably trying to clean up format before upload. Denton's jaw tensed. And no one caught it. The room said nothing. He turned to Nina. How did you even spot this? Nina didn't flinch. I was reviewing retention logic. It didn't match the behavior curve we presented last quarter. I just followed the formula. Victor looked annoyed now, not at her, but at the situation spiraling too close to airtime. He took a step forward. Look, the change wasn't malicious. It was sloppy, fixable. Denton shook his head. Not if it's already in the stream packet. Did you upload to the server? Nina hesitated. Only to the shared drive. It hasn't gone out yet. Someone whispered. Thank God. Victor raised a hand. Okay, then we have two options. One, we patch the correct model in now, reformat the slide deck, and delay the stream. And two, Denton asked, already bracing. We go live asses? No edits. If someone questions the curve, we spin it as aggressive forecasting. Denton's voice dropped. That's not just spin, Victor. That's exposure. Victor crossed his arms. We're 2 minutes out. Do you want to cancel the entire pitch over a percentage curve? Silence again. But this time, it was heavier. Because the truth wasn't about one number. It was about who would take the fall if it broke. Victor tapped his watch. We have 90 seconds. Can someone patch the corrected slide in? The lead designer shook her head. Not without breaking transitions. The animations are locked to the old version. Then revert to a still image, Denton said. Ditch the animation. Clean numbers only. A tech assistant typed furiously. That file was never exported in PDF. We'd have to regenerate it. Victor turned to the back. Then regenerate it. Sir, we don't have time. Stream auto launches in 60 seconds unless we kill the signal. No one moved. In that moment, the screen flickered briefly, loading the final cue deck. The title slide appeared. The countdown began flashing. 15, 57. The room filled with movement. Someone was trying to locate the old file. Another opened a blank keynote template. Voices overlapped. Words like optics, coverage, and margin of error flew around the table like shrapnel. But the curve was still wrong, and everyone knew it. Nina sat down again, staring at the mess unfolding. Her hands clenched. The data didn't lie. The math was still broken. And no one here had time or clarity to rebuild it from scratch. Except one person. She didn't ask permission. She opened the internal message app, searched the staff directory, typed one name, Leona Grant. Can you fix it in under 2 minutes? She hit send. No one saw her do it. But for the first time since this chaos began, Nina's breath steadied. Because she wasn't guessing anymore. She was choosing who to trust. The room was still mid-panic when the side door clicked open again. Leona walked in. No one had called her. No one had even noticed she was still in the building. But there she was, calm, direct, without a tray or a badge or a reason anyone could justify. She didn't ask permission. She didn't wait to be acknowledged. She walked straight to the whiteboard. Victor noticed her too late. He turned, startled. What did to do? But she had already picked up the marker. Her handwriting was clean, fast, unshaking. In 2 lines, she erased the faulty base formula and replaced it with something no one expected to see that morning. Linear trust decay accurate post-2021. Consumer volatility is fractal. She capped the marker. Watch her waiter ready 189 tons. Turned around. Victor stared at her. You think you can just walk in and rewrite a $150 million model? Leona didn't flinch. No, she said, but I can fix it. Around the room, people had stopped moving. A few were still mid-motion, hands hovering over keyboards, mouths half open, but the noise had died. The only sound was the hum of the projector and the blinking countdown clock, 34 seconds. Leona pointed to the new formula. You're modeling customer trust like it fades evenly over time. It doesn't. It drops in waves triggered by events, patterns, instability. Since 2021, loyalty isn't linear. It fractures. Someone whispered near the back. That's true. That actually makes sense. Victor said nothing, and Leona didn't wait for him to agree. She stepped to the side, exposing the board fully. Your forecast doesn't need to collapse. It just needs to reflect what's actually happening. She said it without ego, without anger, just clarity. For the first time all morning, no one in the room had anything to add. Leona stepped back from the whiteboard, not to retreat, but to give the numbers space to speak. For a few seconds, no one moved. Then Nina stood, calmly, with a slight tremble in her fingers. She connected her tablet to the projector. The slide on the screen shifted. The old forecast flickered, then disappeared, replaced by a new projection curve built on the formula Leona had just written. It was lower, more conservative, but smoother. When Shananaswardiu, tighter, stronger, someone exhaled. Another leaned forward. Nina spoke, her voice steady. This model uses event-driven loyalty decay. It updates weekly based on engagement drift. The volatility is built in. The head of partnerships glanced at the numbers. That explains the dip we saw last quarter. We blame seasonality, but this fits the behavior better. The CFO muttered, "It's more defensible." The woman from legal whispered, "And it aligns with our public filings." Even Victor didn't speak right away. He looked at the curve, then at the room, then back at Leona. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't proud. She was focused, like someone who'd just patched a leak before the ship sank and was waiting to see if anyone noticed the floor had stopped creaking. The silence wasn't cold anymore. It was full, like everyone was finally in the same conversation, and no one dared interrupt it. Victor didn't look at the screen anymore. He looked at Leona. There was calculation behind his silence now, but also something else, caution. For the first time that morning, he knew the numbers weren't the biggest variable in the room. She was a show. He folded his arms. Where did you learn this? The question wasn't rude, but it wasn't neutral either. It carried the edge of disbelief, as if knowing the math somehow made her more suspicious, not more credible. Leona held his gaze. She didn't blink. At a place you probably never had to leave behind. A beat of stillness followed. 1 second. 2 where a sewer. Someone near the table flinched. Not from volume, but from the weight of what wasn't being explained. She didn't offer degrees. No job titles. No timeline. Just that sentence. You're Shurnaman. So. And somehow it told them everything. Victor didn't respond. He couldn't not with his usual deflection. The air between them had shifted. The room was no longer just about data and delivery. It was about who gets believed and who gets erased before they even speak. Leona turned back to the whiteboard. She didn't need his approval. She had already corrected his forecast. The screen showed the new model and on and random. The room had gone quiet again. But this silence was different. It wasn't resistance. It was recalibration. Victor looked at the clock. Less than 30 seconds. He stood still, arms crossed, every instinct in him pulling in opposite directions. For years, he had built his reputation on control, on polished language, consistent messaging, and never giving the room to anyone who hadn't earned it by resume, title, or tenure. Leona had none of that. And yet, in front of every executive in the room, she had rebuilt their entire forecast in under 2 minutes, and no one could prove her wrong. He glanced at Denton. CFO gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. Not approval, just recognition. Victor looked back at the screen, then at the woman who'd drawn the correction by hand, in silence, while the rest of them scrambled. His voice was low. If we use this, we're trusting someone not even on the payroll. Leona didn't move. No, she said. You're trusting the math. Another pause. The kind that holds weight. The kind that splits people into before and after. Victor stared at her. And in that moment, for the first time all morning, he didn't see a job title. He saw accuracy. Calm, control and warning, Shuriken. The very things he always demanded, but had just come from the last place he expected. He opened his mouth to say something, but she spoke first. Quiet. Final. Numbers don't care about job titles. No one argued. No one applauded. The stream countdown hit 0. And for the first time in the entire morning, Victor didn't say a word. He just stepped aside. Let the numbers speak for themselves. The model was on the screen. The forecast had been changed. No one dared touch the keyboard again. The room had gone quiet, not from respect, but from calculation. A board member sitting near the far end, Randall Kane, sharp suit, older, always the last to speak, leaned forward and broke the silence. If she's wrong, he said flatly, we lose credibility midstream. You know that, right? His voice wasn't raised, but every word hit like a slow drum beat. If that number dips outside our projection range, we don't just look careless. We look dishonest. Victor didn't respond right away. Nina glanced at Leona, who hadn't moved. Still standing near the board, hands relaxed, face unreadable. Nina stood. Or she just saved this company from being fact-checked live by someone we can't control. Randall turned his eyes on her. And you are, Tummer, Nanina, strategy in turn. Her voice didn't waver, and I checked the logic. Twice. That caught a few eyes. One or two eyebrows raised, but no one interrupted. Victor finally stepped forward. He didn't argue, didn't defend, just walked to the whiteboard where Leona had written her formula and picked up a black marker. He hesitated, then wrote 2 words underneath the model. Senior Advisor Provisional. No announcement, no ceremony, just black ink on whiteboard. Leona didn't thank him. She didn't smile. She simply nodded once, then stepped back into the line of shadows by the wall, like nothing had changed. But everything had. The ink hadn't even dried when the countdown screen flashed again. Sirenon, someone. No one spoke. No one moved. The room had the silence of a courtroom right before the verdict, everyone breathing carefully, trying not to tilt the weight of what had just shifted. Victor stepped back from the board, eyes on the screen now. The final slide loaded Tower West Capital, future forward. No more edits. No more decisions. Whatever happened next was already in motion. The tech crew gave a thumbs up from the back corner. The live stream was now locked. All data synced. All video feeds armed. No more hiding. Victor adjusted his mic. His shoulders lifted on a breath he didn't realize he was holding. Across the room, Nina sat down again. She didn't touch her tablet. She just looked at Leona, still in the shadows by the board. Their eyes met for a brief second. Neither of them smiled, but both of them knew. 0-103. Victor took one step forward. The camera light turned red. And just like that, they were live. Outside the glass walls, the city moved as always. Cars, noise, business as usual. But inside this room, nothing was routine anymore. For the first time, Tower West was about to tell a story built not on Polish, but on truth. Victor adjusted his mic. The camera light blinked solid red. They were live. Sernaka Newari was soon. His tone was confident, his posture rehearsed, but his pulse hadn't slowed since the moment Leona rewrote their forecast. Still, he spoke like he always did, controlled. He walked the investors through Tower West's vision, strategic goals, market reach, and the 5-year projection plan that had been rebuilt less than 15 minutes ago. No one on the live stream knew what had just happened behind the scenes. No one could see the line of tension that still sat in his shoulders. But halfway through the opening, Victor did something he hadn't planned. He stepped to the side. His words slowed. I want to pause here for a moment, he said, to address something that happened this morning. Something that changed not just this model, but how we deliver this message. The room stiffened slightly. Every person sitting off camera looked up. Victor continued. The corrected model you see behind me, the one that reflects real retention behavior, not projected, it didn't come from one of our partners, or our legal team, or our lead strategist. He glanced toward the edge of the room. It came from someone whose name isn't on this slide, but it should be. Then he stepped back and looked at Leona. For a heartbeat, the space between them felt impossibly loud, but Leona didn't hesitate. She walked forward, unhurried, head high. She didn't carry papers. She didn't check notes. She didn't need to. She stopped in front of the camera. Her hands relaxed at her sides. Her voice was soft but clear. Over the past 3 years, she began, the way people trust companies has changed. Retention no longer follows clean curves or predictable drops. It moves with behavior, with uncertainty, with truth. The slide behind her showed the updated curve lower than before, but grounded. Measured to Washerman. Leona looked directly into the lens. If we keep projecting what looks good instead of what's real, we don't just lose investor trust. we lose accuracy. And when you're building systems, accuracy is empathy. She stepped back. The camera held steady. No one in the room breathed. And on the other side of the live stream, someone finally unmuted. The pause after Leona's words lasted longer than most executives could tolerate. Then, from the screen behind Victor, a voice came through. Deep, calm, older. Unmuted. You built this. Leona didn't blink. No, she said evenly. I rebuilt it. From what you nearly broke. A few heads turned. Someone stifled a laugh. Victor didn't move. He stood still, arms relaxed, not in defense but in acceptance. The investor's voice returned. Well then, I suggest you keep her. Because if you don't, someone else will. And just like that, the tension inside the boardroom let go. No one clapped at Mapimam or Dazeshinmam. It wasn't that kind of moment. But people exhaled, adjusted their posture, looked at each other as if seeing the room for the first time that morning. Another investor chimed in. Model looks solid from our end. Clean logic. Realistic assumptions. Performance triggers align with what we've been seeing market side. Added a third. A light on the screen flashed. Proposal approved. Deal confirmed. Leona stepped back into the background. Nina watched her go. A strange warmth building behind her ribs. For once, it didn't feel like someone had broken through a ceiling. It felt like someone had quietly built a new floor and stood on it. Victor cleared his throat and finished the pitch. Smooth, measured. But something in his voice had changed, less polish, more weight. The stream ended. The camera light went dark. And everyone stood at the same time, no signal, no instruction. Just instinct. For a moment, no one approached Leona. Not out of avoidance, but out of adjustment. The silence around her had shifted. It was no longer the kind used to ignore her. It was the kind people made, right before they realized they'd missed something important. Outside the boardroom, the glass reflected nothing but city lights. Inside, names were being whispered differently. And for the first time, no one called her the woman with the coffee. They called her the reason the deal went through. 1 month later, the lobby of Tower West didn't look the same. Where there used to be a blank glass wall beside the investor wing, there was now a single line etched in frosted silver. The Grand Insight Initiative. For overlooked brilliance. For untapped minds. No ribbon cutting. No speeches. Just a plaque. And a name that had once been left off every schedule. Inside a small conference room 2 floors down, Leona stood in front of 8 teenagers from the district's public school system, some in hoodies, some in uniforms, all holding notebooks that had barely been touched. On the whiteboard behind her were 5 words. How systems handle smart people. She didn't lecture. She asked, what happens, she said, if a system ignores you long enough? The room was quiet. Then one girl near the corner raised her hand. Do you stop trying? Leona smiled gently. Or, she said, do you start solving from the outside? They kept writing. Later, as the class packed up, a younger girl with tight braids lingered near the door. She looked up at Leona, hesitant. Were you scared? She asked softly. When they laughed at you? Leona didn't answer right away. She knelt a little to meet her eye level. Yes, she said, but I was more scared of staying invisible forever. The girl didn't say anything, but she nodded slowly and tucked that answer somewhere deep, like a folded note in her pocket. That night, as the city settled into its glow, Leona walked alone through the side entrance of the New West Annex. She passed the security gate. No clipboard, no pass. She didn't carry coffee. She carried a tablet, a folder, and a quiet certainty. The elevator opened. She stepped in. As the doors began to close, the etched glass beside her caught the light one more time. Grand Insight Initiative. And for once, she didn't disappear behind the door. She arrived with her name on it. If you've ever felt unseen, unheard, or underestimated, this story was for you. Tell us where you're watching from. Your voice may be exactly what someone else needs to see their own name on the glass. And follow Unveiled Wealth, where quiet brilliance never stays invisible for long.